What is up, guys? Thank you for joining me for another tutorial. Today we're actually going to build a Node Express REST API from scratch. We're going to use Sequelize, we're going to hook up to a Postgres database, and we're going to use that. We're going to build it all as a Node application, and we're going to do this. It's going to be a good boilerplate or a template project that you can actually have and use in the future if you have any projects that involve creating a REST API, or if you want to experiment on building a REST API. This is a good foundation for that. We're going to build a create, read, update, and delete route, and I'm going to show you how to put all of that together, hooking up to the database, using the controllers to perform actions on your data, and then returning that data back to the end user. So don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I'm almost at 500 subscribers. That is my next goal. So if you can share this video and subscribe to my channel, turn on the bell notifications so you can get the most recent content and be the first one to see it. Also, if you like this video, don't forget to hit that like button. Everything is appreciated, every like, every subscription. That keeps me motivated to bring you more content and to talk more about web development and technologies. Anyways, let's get started. Okay, so we all know that the purpose of an API is to access data from a database and do whatever you want with it, transform it, or use it in your project in the front end, or to analyze it. So in this case, we're going to connect to a Postgres database. So if you notice on the screen here, I have a Docker Compose file open. I like to run my database instances on my machine in Docker because it's easy to tear down and clean up, and I don't have to install the actual Postgres on my computer. I can just run a container if I install Docker on my computer. So that's what this Docker Compose file is here. I'm not going to explain what's going on in this file, but right off the top, you can see that we're building a Postgres container, and we're just setting the credentials, very basic because it's a development database. It obviously wouldn't be this basic if it was production. You'd have more fancy passwords and usernames. And the name of our database is REST. We're exposing port 5432. So if I do a docker compose up-d, and now we have a working Postgres database that's running on my computer. Now, if you don't have Docker on your computer and don't want to go this route, that's fine. You can download an instance of Postgres on your computer. That way that you can have a local Postgres server database running on your machine. And if you don't want to do that either, if you already have a Postgres database in the cloud, you're more than welcome to connect to that as well. You can also connect to a MySQL database too. I'll show you how to change the drivers to connect to a MySQL database if you want. But we're going to stick with SQL, and those are going to be our two options for now. You can expand upon that or change it if you'd like to in the future. So let's get started, basically. We're going to open up the project here. And so far I don't have anything going on. I just have this Docker Compose file here. And I know that for our structure, just like any other project, we're going to have a, we're going to have a source directory, and that's going to be there. And we're going to want to start this project, initiate this project with npm, just like any other project we're getting ready to start. Just hit enter to all of these. You can put in the name and stuff if you'd like. So we have our package.json going, and we're going to install our necessary packages. Okay, so we're going to be using .env for our environment variables. We're going to use a wonderful package called ESM, which lets us use the ES6 syntax without having to babble it. We're going to download Express because that's what our server is going to be running on. We're going to do Helmet for our security headers. We're going to do logging with Morgan. I'm going to download the PG, which is the Postgres driver, which is going to be used for Sequelize. And we're going to get Sequelize. We're going to use version 5.21.7. Let's install that. And over here in the source directory, I could start setting up some files. So when I'm building my REST API, I know that I'm going to use routes or routes. So I'm going to build a folder for routes. I know that I'm going to have controllers to functions to handle the incoming requests and what response I'm going to send. I might have a folder for utilities, any functions that I use that are going to be used repeatedly. I can keep them in utilities. Going back down here, it looks like our packages are done downloading. If we go to our package.json, this looks good. Now the only dev dependency we're going to need is NodeJs. And that's so that we can run the dev environment and it can watch our server. Every time we make a change, it will refresh and apply those new changes. We're going to have one script for our development environment. This is going to be a dev script. And we're going to set the development environment, the node environment to development. We're going to call NodeJs. And we are going to call source/index.js. Let's save that. And now, inside of our source directory, we're going to have an index.js file. And we're going to make a file for the server. This is where all of our server code is going to go. Now, NodeJs is going to call the index.js file because we're using ESM, which is an amazing tool. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this here because I have this already open on another screen. And basically it's requiring ESM and it's exporting it and we're going to use server.js. So this is going to transpile all of our code. We don't have to worry about using Babel, and we can use import. We can use all the ES6 syntax, no problem. And it makes things so much easier. So if I hit save here, that's all good to go. So every time I hit npm run dev, it's going to set the environment variable to development, and it's going to call NodeJs, and NodeJs is going to look over here, and it's going to go right here to server.js and call all of our server code. So let's confirm our directory structure right now. We're also going to need a directory for models. And let's make another directory for config. Okay, so let's get the config out of the way first. The config is always one of those things where you just want to just get it over with, have it, get it done with, and kind of never touch it again, you know? Config.js. Right away, I can tell you that we're going to need an env file for this because we're not going to want to type in all of our credentials, and there's possible we can use these variables in other spots too. So having an env file is always helpful. So I told you that in the beginning when I opened this up, I set the password, the user, and the database here. So over here, we're going to set some environment variables. REST. So the database is REST. User is Postgres. Password is Postgres. Host. Localhost. Postgres port is 5432. And the port for our application is going to run on 4000. So if I save that, we have our environment variables for our database set up and ready to go. This file would look different on your server, so I wouldn't even include this in the in your Git. So like we're going to make a .git ignore. And almost all the time you're going to want to ignore the env file. You're definitely going to want to ignore node modules. We haven't even initialized this in Git yet, but this once we do, it will ignore this and this right off the bat, which is perfect because we don't need to see those in our repository. It's a security thing. So going back to config, we're going to require our environment variables in here. .env/config. We're going to export. So for our development environment variables, we're going to list our databases. The first database, well, actually, the only database is going to be REST. So and this is our database. It's going to be PostgreSDB. Next thing we're going to put is our username. Down here, we're going to put our password. We're going to have the host, port, and last but not least, we need to have a spot for dialect. This one, we're not using an environment variable. We're just telling it, use Postgres. This is where you would put MySQL or the other database of your choice. If you're using Mongo or anything, you would put that here. Process that. We're going to call these environment variables over here. This is where they come in handy and we use those. So this is our development credentials. This should connect to our database. There's nothing there to connect it right now, but when it is ready to connect, it should call this config and we should connect no problem. Now you'd have another one set up for production as well. So if I go to the end here, just copy this, paste it here. And I'm going to leave everything the same here because I don't have a production environment yet. And when I do put this in production environment, this would still work if my env file has different credentials in it for a production environment. It will still pick it up and it will still do the same thing. And like I said, if you wanted to use MySQL instead of Postgres or some other database, you'd have to download the driver for it. For Postgres, it's PG. For MySQL, I think it is actually MySQL, but if you go to Sequelize documentation and look up how to connect to a database, it will show you the different methods and databases you can connect to. So with our config file set, we can leave this alone. We shouldn't have to touch this for the rest of the application, and that's a pretty solid file right there. Okay, so let's just build up a little bit of server.js right now. First thing we want to do is import our environment variables in. We're going to want to import express from. And the reason I'm able to use this import syntax, remember, is because of that ESM package right here that points to server.js. Get rid of that. Let's import Morgan from Morgan. We're going to be using the file system for logging. We're going to be using our path. And we're going to import our roots. So let's set the app equal to express. Let's use some middleware. We're going to use Helmet, and Helmet is really good because it sets up security headers for your application, and you don't have to do anything, it just does it for you. There is obviously options you can find in their documentation on their website. Right now I'm adding a combined format for logging, and we're actually going to stream this to a file later on in this video. We're going to do a parsing for JSON. We're going to limit that to 50 megabytes on this API. You can adjust that to whatever you want, or you don't even have to do it really if you don't want to. Express.url encoded. Extended true. Limit 50 megabytes. And we're going to use app.use. We're going to set up our first route. In this API, we are only going to have one route, and it's going to be able to create, read, update, and delete. So we're going to use users for an example. So /user is what our route is going to start off with. And then we're going to call on routes.user, which is not created yet. We're going to have to create that next. And of course, we're going to want to put a spot for if you don't type in the right URL, you get a 404 message. And there you have it. We have our basic structure set up here in the server page. Now we're going to want to turn on our server. Listen. We're going to call our port environment variable. And once that gets up and running, I'm just going to call that. So once we flick on npm run dev, for example, it's going to console this as if it starts up and everything's working. This is our indicator to let us know that it's on and running. Now that server.js is set up for the most part, we still can't turn this on and have it run with NodeJs because we will get errors because we're calling in routes that don't exist yet. Oh, I'm going to make sure we want to save that for good. Let's exit out of there for now. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to models. We're going to create an index.js here. And then we're also going to create inside of models, we're going to create a folder. We're going to name it REST. And inside of here, we're going to create user.js. This is going to be our actual user model. And we're going to build this up using Sequelize. Define, and we're gonna name this table. It's gonna be called user. And now let's start building out the schema. So we're obviously gonna have an ID field, and this is going to be an integer. It's going to be a primary key. And in Postgres, this is auto. It's a serial. It's called serial, but it's auto increment. I'm going to set that to true. And we're going to do a username. It's going to be data types dot string, and we're going to want to make that unique. So there's only one username allowed of that kind, and of course we're going to do a password. So we type data types dot string, and you can add validation to this as well, or parameters like make it a certain length, obviously, which is what I would do in a production application. But for now, we're just going to finish our basic schema like this. Then we are going to include timestamps, and we're going to freeze the table name. What did I spell wrong here? Timestamps, stamps. We're going to call a sync here to sync our table. And this is what I love about Sequelize is we don't even actually have to touch the database and build our table from the database. We could build it right here in code. This will build it for us once this is connected and running. And then in this index.js file, I'm literally just going to copy and paste here because this is a standard setup file for Sequelize that you can find all over the internet. So you can copy and paste it as well. You would have to make sure that all of this matches up. The only things that need to be fixed in here is obviously make sure your paths are correct, like this config file is in fact located over here. And then also you're going to want to make sure that these directories are correct. You have one here, and this is important as well. So we're calling this directory right here, and we're calling the rest folder. Same over here. And for each file in the rest folder is going to be a model. And this is our db.rest.import because that's the name of our database or application. So db.rest.import, let's save that. And as far as connecting to the database, this should handle it for Sequelize. That's all set. Let's make a route really quick. We're going to do user.js routes. And in here, we also need an index.js. And we're going to import user from user and export default. Now this is just a spot where if you had multiple routes in a real application, you probably have multiple routes. This is just the index to pull out of this directory directly. That way you can export all your stuff from this file in routes. So let's build up our first routes file. We're going to import router from express. And over here, we're going to call a controller file which has not been created yet, but we're going to call it user.controller. So when it is created, that's the file it's going to pull from. Alright, let's save this. Don't forget actually to export router. And there's going to be some routes going here. But let's create this controller file first. User.controller.js. Okay. And let's set up, let's just do this. Let's require our models directory, which remember this contains all the information to hook up to our database. And we're going to declare our model here for users. db.rest.models. Oh yeah, .user. That looks right. So let's build our first function. And the first one, we're just going to call it getUser. It's going to be asynchronous. We're always going to have a request and a response to handle. And we're just going to put something simple in here right now. Okay, so let me explain what I just did. Here we're calling in the user model so that we can use it to find data in our functions here. I just created a function called getUser, and eventually this is going to actually get the user from the database and return it in the response for the API. But for now, it's just sending you a message saying that this is working. I'm exporting it here as well. So if I go back over to routes over here, bring this controller over here, I don't need this file anymore. I'm going to declare my first individual route. That's going to be router. It's going to be a get route. And we're going to get user. So we're going to use an ID. And this is going to get us a single user. user.getUser. So I'm calling this function, I'm importing it over here, the file, and I'm calling it right here. So whenever I hit this route, whenever I hit user/user, it's going to look in routes.user. It's going to go over here, and this route's going to pop up if I have localhost/user/an ID. Then it's going to get my user. It's going to return a user. It's going to say, okay, that's this route right here, and it's going to call the function over here, and ideally this would return the user. So with a route in place, with a controller in place, with the connection apparently hooked up, let's try to run this application. We shouldn't get any errors here. Everything looks pretty good for now. But you know what? You'll never know until you try. So, running it, and successful. We have a successful run. And if you look here in the logs, it says create table if not exists. So we've just created the table for users. I already had this database created and did a few tests on it, but I can show you here that this is what it will create. It will create the user table right here. So if I delete this, oh, why won't it let me? Connection has been closed. Great. Okay, so I deleted it. So if you're starting from scratch, if I save this, basically what it's going to do is it's going to call this user.sync, and that's what is setting this database up for us. So if I refresh this now, boom, users, blank. ID, username, password, and our timestamps. So that is officially set up. So if you notice here, I have Postman open already, and I've already set up 4 tests for our routes that we're going to eventually create. But the first one that we already have created is get user right here. And remember, we're calling /user, and then we're adding in an ID to grab a specific user's information. At this moment, there is no user 3, but I'm putting an ID here just so that we can get this thing to give us something back. And if you remember, what we programmed was a message saying this is working. So if I send this, it sends back a message saying this is working. Now this is big for our application, because now we have our base, our foundation set, and we can connect and officially get back data from the routes that we're creating. So this is a huge part in the project, because we've actually accomplished a lot with very little. So we can essentially start building up this controller and get back some real data. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to grab the ID from the parameters, because it's a parameter in the URL, and we're going to search for a user. Now in Sequelize, you have these cool functions like find one, which is way better than a select statement, and we're going to search where that ID is. But if there is no user, then we're going to return an error. I'm going to just return 400 here. You can go ahead and Google appropriate error codes. There's so many of them. But for the sake of being quick in this application, we are going to just send back a 400 error. And we're just going to basically tell them with a message saying that no user was found with this ID. And besides that, we are going to just send them the user if it comes back. And that's it. This is what our first official route looks like to grab a user. But we can't grab a user yet if we don't have users in our database. So you know what we'll do for the next route? We will build one for creating a user. And I'm just going to copy this, paste it here. I'm just going to change this to create. All right, so we're going to be taking in some body information in this because we don't want them putting their password and their username in the URL, like a GET request. So we're going to have them put it in the body. So we're going to be pulling from the body. And there's two things that we need. We need the username and we need the password. And if you don't include a username or a password, we're going to give you one of these messages. Just copy, paste. You need to include a username and password to create a user, dummy. I mean, if you don't include those things and you're trying to create a user, it might be safe to say that you're a dummy. That's good. Now we're going to see if this username exists. Now let's do a user.findOne where username. And if username exists, we're going to give you another one of these bad boys. And we're just going to change the message here. A user with the username using string literals already exists. Bam. So that covers that base there. And now, well, let's get rid of this because we don't need this anymore. Now we're going to create the actual user. So I'm going to wrap this in a try-catch block. And if it errors out, we're just going to send an error to the front. This, send an error back. We're going to make this a 500 error. And we're going to put the message in here, error.message. All right, so this is where the final part of this route goes. We actually create the user here, and we're going to return the user from within inside the try-catch block. So let new user equal await user.create, and then we put in our stuff. And that should do it. That will create our user, and then here we'll send new user to the front. So we're checking here if you included your username and password. If you didn't, get an error. Now we're checking if that username exists or not. If it does, get an error. And then we're creating the user if it doesn't. So let's jump back over to Postman now. And we have our create a new user thing here. So we got to set up the route for this. So if we go back over here to our routes, we're going to do router.get, and this one's going to be create user / create user. And we're going to call the create user function. Boom. If you notice down here, Nodemon is still running. The application is still live. We're not getting any errors. And we can go over to Postman now. And if we have create a new user here. And in Postman, you're going to go to the body section. Get rid of this stuff here. Do raw data, and you make sure this is usually text, make sure it's JSON. And we're going to create an object. We're going to do username. Let's name this guy admin. Password is going to be password 123. Super secure. Anyways, send that off. 404 page not found. So there's something wrong here. And I think I know what it is. I think we accidentally, yep, this is not a get route. This is in fact a post route. Okay. Now this should work. Boom. And we've created a new user with the name admin and the password 123. So if we go back to our database view, and if I refresh in here, you can see we have a new row, admin password 123 with our timestamps. Good to go. Okay, so let's move along. Actually, you know what? Let's stay here really quick and let's test the get user route. So this is user ID 1, right? So if I go here, put 1, boom, I get my user back. So it's working properly. Let's make our next, close off some of these tabs. All right, let's make our next route. So we're going to, I'm just going to copy this. See, a lot of this stuff is copy, paste, and we're going to name this update user. Okay, and then we could leave this here because we might use a lot of this actually. We're going to have username and password in the body in case they want to change the username and password. It is not required because you might not want to change your password when you change your username and vice versa. But we're going to declare those variables up here. And in the parameters, we're going to have the user ID. So that's how we're going to know what user we're actually updating. So we're going to params. Okay. And then we're going to look for the user to make sure that they exist. User.find one where ID. And then if this user doesn't exist, we're just going to here check for user. If the user doesn't exist, user exists with the ID. And then we're going to do our update. So I'm going to get rid of this username exists stuff because we're not creating a new user anymore. We've pulled our user information here, and inside this try catch block, we're going to update our information. If there is a username, user dot username equals the new username. If there is a password, user dot password equals our new password. And we're going to save. And we're just going to return a message saying user ID has been updated. That looks good. I think that'll do it. So pulling in a username and password, if they exist, we're getting the ID to tell us what user that we're actually updating. We're checking for that user. If they don't exist, we'll give you an error. If they do, we're updating the information that they provide, and then we're saving it. And this is what actually causes the update to finalize and save. So if we go back over to Postman, go to update user. Oh, we did it again. We're going to have to create our route first. So this is called update user for the function. We could just paste this here. Slash update user. And remember, we're going to have an ID in the params. So we're going to do slash ID. Update user up here. Save that. That should be good to go. So if we go to Postman, I don't know why this says delete, And a matter of fact, let's simplify this route. Let's name it just update. It doesn't need to be the same as the function. So it's going to be update. And let's simplify this one too. Create. You want to make them as simple as possible. The less typing, especially in the URL, the better. So this would be user/update, and we're updating the user 1. And so that's good for the URL. It's a post. And in the body, we're going to update the username to AFK developer. So that should do that. Let's see what happens. User 1 has been updated. Looks like it was successful. Let's check here. And it was. Looks good. Now let's just make sure that the password part is working. Let's upgrade our password security. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, we're getting a user has been updated message. And if I refresh this, we have our user updated, our password updated. Good stuff. We have one more route to go and we are finished. So we're going to make the delete route. And this is a very simple one. So let me copy this again. If you notice, a lot of these are basically, very, very similar. So I hope it makes it easier for you to see how I do things, because a lot of times you just need to copy and paste some stuff and change the inside of it, obviously. So to delete the user, we're going to take an ID in, and we're going to take it in from the body though. And if there is no ID, send a message saying, please provide the ID of the user you are trying to delete. And then we're going to grab the user, so just like this, copy from here, same exact thing over here, paste it here. Find the user by the ID. If the user doesn't exist, throw an error. That's good. And then now we're going to proceed to delete the user. Let's get rid of this stuff. And this is very simple. It's literally an await user.destroy command. We're going to send back a message saying user has been deleted. And that should do it. Save this. Let's go back over to Postman to delete a user. So /delete, which is correct because we have to set our route over here. No parameters. We're going to take the ID in the body in this one. So we're going to go over to the body. And right now I have the ID of 4 in there, but we only have one user, so it's user number 1. I'm going to put this here, send it. And something is wrong. Let's cancel this. Request.body, if no ID, user, where ID? ID has invalid undefined value. Dun, dun, dun. Here in the body, we have request.body.id. We're deleting the user. Up here, we have request.body. So let's do some debugging together, guys, and see what's going on here. I'm going to comment this code out, and I'm just going to console.log ID. Let's see what happens when I hit this. And in order for this to hit, then I can cancel this. Oh, that's what we're doing. Gosh. I am so stupid sometimes. Forgive me, guys. That was... It's always those little things that choke you up. Anyways, that should be good to go. Send this. User 1 has been deleted, finally. Go over here. Refresh. They're gone. There you have it, guys. That's a create, read, update, and delete route for you for the users. You can make this more advanced by adding password, hashing, and all that stuff. If you look up in Sequelize, if you look at their documentation, they can show you, different ways to set that up in the model instance, where you can call functions before you create. But right here is a good place to be for a basic boilerplate template REST API in Node and Express. This will get you started, and it is fun to build up on it from here. Make it your own, use whatever routes you want, but this is your base. So let's add an API key in the middle. We're going to have to add a middleware. We're going to have to create a custom middleware. So I'm going to make a new file in utils, and I'm going to call it isAuthenticated.js. And in this file, I'm going to require our environment variables. I'm going to export const is authenticated. If there is no API key in the URL query, we're going to return, we're going to set the status to 401, and we're going to send them a message saying must be authenticated with an API key to hit this endpoint. So if they don't put an API key or provide one, we can give them this message and we won't let them get their data. Or else we can pull this API key from the query. And if our API key equals process.env.api key, return next, which basically says keep going, finish off this request, give them their data back. Or else we're going to tell them that their key is not valid. Okay, so I want to talk about this right here, process.env.api key. So I'm going to set that up here. Make it a random string. Now I'm going to set this up here. Now this is our API key for now. If you notice, it is static. It is in this file, so this can be the only API key for this application. I wouldn't recommend doing this in production. I would recommend having a database for your API keys or API key. That way you can find the API key. So if somebody provides an API key, it'll go through and it will look for that API key in the database. And you can have multiple API keys if that's the case. And then if, let's say, somebody you want to cut them off from using the API and they're the only one with that API key, all you have to do is delete that entry in the database, and now they can't access it anymore. But the thing is, when you have a static API key, it's only looking at one key. And this one key is not built in the database, so you can't change it on the fly. It's actually a string in your file, so you have to actually physically go on the server and change that API key. And it's a pain in the neck, especially when you have multiple people using your API. You're going to want to make sure you have dynamic API keys. But for the sake of this example, I'm going to include it right here in the env file. So let's see what happens. First, let me copy this. Oh, let me apply this. Go to server.js. And this is a middleware, so we're going to import is authenticated from our utils / is authenticated. And the middleware goes right here in the middle. Now, if you wanted to use an API key for a certain role or certain routes in the user route, then you could just apply it in here as well. You can just put it in here, and it would actually do it per route. And you can, take it out of here, and then if you want like 2 of these with it and one of them just free without the API key, you can do that like this way if you want. But this covers the whole /user, the create, read, the update, all of that stuff. So if I save this, now if I try to create a new user, it's going to tell me I must be authenticated with an API key. Now let's add the API key in and see what happens. We're going to add that in the params. It's going to be API key. And just paste it in there. Page not found. I think it's having a problem reading the env for this specific situation. So I'm just going to copy, well, I already had this copied, but I'm going to go into is authenticated. I'm going to try it like this instead. I think I've had this problem before. Page not found. Oh, that's right, we changed this. We changed this to create, made it simple. Boom, there we go. The API key is officially working now. So we have an API key, so we're secure on that end. If you want certain people to use your API, you can give them the key. Like I said, it's recommended to have dynamic API keys. But this is good for now because this shows you how you can do that, how you can set up an API key in your API so that you can start locking your stuff down and making sure that it's secure and only certain people that you know are using your API or trusted people are using your API. So let's go back and do one more thing. We're going to let's build some logs because we're going to want to see like what's going on. So we're going to actually write those to a file. We're going to go to const access log stream. I think it's create write stream path.join. And we're going to write it to access.log in the root. Those are options for flags. And this actually goes right here. We're going to do stream. And we're going to put our access log stream here. If you notice, it pulled this in, but we don't really need that. And that should do it. If I save here, our access log file was created. So I can create a user over here. Let's create a user admin2, send it. Now if you look in access log, it will start logging all the requests that are made to the API. So this is helpful if you need to diagnose or debug something. But that's it, guys. This is our, a basic REST API built with Express, Sequelize, Node, and using Postgres. This is perfect if you're beginning to get into creating REST APIs or using REST APIs, and you want to know how they work behind the scenes. Also, it's good if you just need to start an API project, and you can use this as a boilerplate. I'm going to put it up on GitHub. I'll put the link in the description so you can use it. You can do whatever you want to it, make it custom, make it yours, and it's always a pleasure. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.